Welcome to Sherlock's Casebook, where every mystery has a story, and every story hides a secret. Step into the world of deduction, suspense, and untold cases of Sherlock Holmes. Are you ready to uncover the truth? A perplexing crime. It was a cold and mist-laden evening in early November when I found myself once more in the familiar warmth of 221B Baker Street, seated opposite my dear friend Sherlock Holmes. The fire crackled, casting flickering shadows upon the walls, and Holmes, his long fingers steepled beneath his chin, appeared lost in contemplation. The tranquillity of our evening was abruptly shattered by the arrival of a frantic visitor. A sharp knock at the door was followed by the hurried entrance of Inspector Lestrade, his usually composed demeanour betraying a rare sense of urgency. "Mr. Holmes," Lestrade panted, removing his hat with a trembling hand. "We have a case, an impossible case." Holmes's eyes sparkled with sudden interest. "Do sit down, Lestrade. Compose yourself and tell us everything. What, pray, is impossible this time?" Lestrade hesitated for only a moment before blurting out, "A train has vanished, Mr. Holmes, disappeared without a trace." Watson and I exchanged glances. "Vanished?" I repeated incredulously. "Precisely," Lestrade confirmed. The 9:15 evening express from Paddington to Bristol left the station as scheduled, carrying some 40 passengers, a full crew, and a shipment of valuable cargo. Yet somewhere between Slough and Reading, the entire train, engine, carriages and all, ceased to exist. Holmes sat forward, his expression sharp. No wreckage, no sign of an accident. "None," Lestrade said gravely. "The train entered a tunnel and never emerged." Holmes exhaled slowly, his keen gaze locking onto Lestrade with the intensity of a predator scenting its prey. "A train swallowed by the darkness," he murmured. "Now that, Lestrade, is a most fascinating problem indeed. The mystery deepens." Holmes leaned forward, his fingers drumming lightly on the armrest of his chair. His sharp, hawk-like eyes fixed on Lestrade with an intensity that suggested his mind was already racing ahead. "A train vanishes into thin air," Holmes mused. "An entire locomotive, its carriages, passengers, and cargo, all lost between two stations? This is quite remarkable, Lestrade, almost poetic in its impossibility." Lestrade sighed, rubbing his temples. "It sounds absurd, I know, but I have men scouring every inch of track between Slough and Reading, and there's nothing. No derailment, no wreckage, not even a broken signal post. It's as if the train simply ceased to exist." I leaned forward, struggling to grasp the full implications. "Surely the tunnel was searched." "Thoroughly, Dr. Watson," Lestrade assured me. "The tracks run straight through, emerging on the other side after roughly 300 yards. There is no junction, no hidden siding. And yet the train entered, but never came out." Holmes's lips curled slightly, his eyes narrowing. "You say there were passengers aboard?" "Yes, though the exact number is still being verified. What we do know is that several prominent individuals were on board, businessmen, government officials, and at least one foreign dignitary. And of course, the cargo." Holmes raised a brow. "Ah, yes. You mentioned something of value." Lestrade hesitated, then lowered his voice. "Gold bullion, Mr. Holmes. A large shipment, bound for the Bank of England." Holmes let out a soft chuckle, his fingers now interlaced beneath his chin. "Well, well, Lestrade, you bring me a case of disappearing trains, missing passengers, and vanished gold. It is a puzzle fit for a magician." Lestrade scowled. "This is no magic trick, Holmes. If we don't find that train soon, there will be an uproar. The public will be in a frenzy, and my superiors are breathing down my neck as it is." Holmes stood suddenly, reaching for his coat. "Then we must not waste a moment, Lestrade. Watson, fetch your hat. We have a train to find." Lestrade looked relieved. "You'll take the case, then?" "My dear Lestrade," Holmes said, already fastening his scarf, "I would not miss this for the world. Examining the scene." The night air was sharp as Holmes, Lestrade, and I stepped onto the dimly lit platform at Slough Station. The usual bustle of railway travel had given way to an uneasy stillness, the few remaining station workers whispering among themselves, casting furtive glances at the tracks as though expecting the missing train to reappear at any moment. Holmes wasted no time. With his long strides he advanced toward the station-master's office, where a stout, balding man awaited us. He appeared flustered, his fingers nervously twisting a pocket-watch. "Mr. Holmes," he said as we entered, I've worked these tracks for 30 years, but never have I seen anything like this." Holmes inclined his head. "I appreciate your cooperation, Mr. Grayson, sir. Henry Grayson." "Very well, Mr. Grayson. Let us begin with the facts. The 9:15 express left this station on schedule." "To the second, sir. It departed Slough at precisely 9:15 p.m., bound for Reading. Routine journey, no delays, no reports of trouble." Holmes tapped a finger to his lips. "And the crew, were they all accounted for?" "Yes, sir. Conductor, fireman, engineer, all well-experienced men. None of them signalled anything unusual before the train entered the tunnel." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Then it is the tunnel that must demand our attention. Come, Watson, Lestrade, we must retrace the train's final passage." The three of us followed a railway worker carrying a lantern, the dim light casting long shadows over the gravel-lined tracks. Soon the great tunnel loomed before us, its dark mouth yawning like the entrance to some subterranean beast. Holmes paused at the threshold, crouching low to examine the rails. He ran his fingers lightly over the metal, his gaze darting to the gravel beneath. He then withdrew a small magnifying glass from his pocket, scrutinizing the ground with meticulous care. Watson, accustomed to these peculiar rituals, watched patiently, though Lestrade, less inclined toward patience, huffed in frustration. "Well, Mr. Holmes," he asked, "see anything?" Holmes did not reply immediately. Instead he stood, brushing off his coat. "Curious," he murmured. "Very curious indeed." "What is?" I asked. Holmes turned to us, his expression unreadable. "For a train that has supposedly passed through here, I find one thing rather astonishing." "And what's that?" Lestrade prompted. Holmes exhaled slowly. "There are no marks on the rails to suggest that a train ever entered this tunnel at all." A stunned silence fell over us. The implications were staggering. But that's impossible," Lestrade stammered. "The train did enter." Holmes smiled faintly. "Then, my dear Lestrade, we must ask ourselves, where did it truly go? The vanishing act. Lestrade's face twisted in disbelief. No marks on the rails? That's absurd, Holmes. The train entered the tunnel. Dozens of people saw it. Holmes straightened, his sharp gaze sweeping over the tunnel's entrance. Then tell me, Lestrade, where are the impressions of its wheels? A train of that weight and velocity does not glide over steel without leaving evidence of its passage. I peered down at the tracks myself. Indeed, though the gravel was slightly disturbed, there were no clear indentations or oil streaks that a heavy locomotive should have left behind. The revelation sent a chill through me. Lestrade, determined to hold on to logic, scoffed. Perhaps the rain washed them away. Holmes turned to him with a trace of amusement. An interesting theory, though flawed. It has not rained in 2 days. Lestrade muttered something under his breath, but before he could argue further, a shout echoed from within the tunnel. "Inspector! Over here!" We hurried toward the voice, the glow of lanterns illuminating the interior of the passage. Beetle, railway workers stood huddled around something at the tunnel's far end. As we approached, I felt a shiver run down my spine. There, embedded in the gravel beside the tracks, lay a single object, an abandoned railway worker's cap. Holmes bent down, lifting the cap between his fingers. It was frayed at the edges, damp from the night air, and bore the initials A.R. Duelats stitched into the lining. Lestrade scratched his head. One of the railwaymen must have dropped it. Holmes twirled the cap between his fingers, his expression unreadable. "Perhaps." A voice piped up from the gathered workers. "Begging your pardon, sir, but that cap, it belongs to a man named Richard Walker, one of our own." Lestrade seized the opportunity. "And where is Mr. Walker now?" The worker hesitated, glancing toward his colleagues. "That's just it, sir. He hasn't been seen since last night." Holmes's eyes gleamed with interest. "Ah, a vanished train and a missing railway worker. Most intriguing." Lestrade nodded, clearly relieved to have a tangible lead. "Right then, we'll put out an alert for this Walker fellow. If he knows something, we'll have him in cuffs before morning." Holmes, however, seemed less convinced. He turned back to the tunnel, his expression contemplative. "Arresting a man we have not yet questioned would be premature, Lestrade. The true trick in any vanishing act is not merely identifying the performer, but understanding how the illusion was achieved." He ran a hand over the tunnel's interior, wall, his fingers pausing at a particular point. He smiled faintly. "And I dare say, gentlemen, we are looking in entirely the wrong direction." Lestrade blinked. "What do you mean?" Holmes stepped back, his gaze locked onto the tunnel. "We have been searching for a train that entered this tunnel and failed to emerge. But what if it never truly entered at all?" Lestrade's mouth opened, then closed again. I felt a familiar thrill. Holmes had glimpsed something none of us had, but before he could explain further, a railway worker came running toward us, his face pale. "Inspector, there's been another disappearance." Holmes's smile faded. "Then, my dear Watson, the game is truly afoot." A second disappearance. The railway worker, breathless from his sprint, skidded to a halt before us. His lantern cast wild shadows across the tunnel walls, his face pale with alarm. "Who has disappeared?" Lestrade demanded. "A signalman, sir," the worker stammered. His name's Thomas Price. He was stationed at the signal box just past the tunnel last night. Now he's nowhere to be found." Holmes's expression sharpened. 2 men missing within the span of a single night. Curious indeed. Lestrade straightened his coat, his initial scepticism fading. "That settles it, then. Walker and Price must have had a hand in this. Inside men, no doubt. Perhaps they sabotaged the train and ran off with the gold." Holmes tilted his head. "A compelling notion, Lestrade, but let us not be so hasty. Theft is a plausible motive, but the mechanics of the crime remain unexplained. How does one make an entire train disappear?" Lestrade frowned. "We'll find out when we catch them." Holmes gave a knowing smile, but did not argue. Instead, he turned back to the railway worker. "Tell me, was Mr. Price acting unusually before his disappearance?" The worker hesitated. "Well, now that you mention it, sir, he did seem anxious last night. Kept looking over his shoulder, like he was expecting someone." Holmes tapped his fingers together. "And where is his signal box?" "Just beyond the tunnel, about 50 yards from the tracks." "Then let us pay it a visit." With lanterns in hand, we followed the railway worker along the tracks, emerging from the tunnel's far end. The signal box loomed ahead, a small wooden structure raised slightly above the ground, overlooking the railway line. Holmes climbed the short flight of steps and pushed open the door. Inside, the cramped room was in perfect order, except for one peculiar detail. A half-finished cup of tea sat upon the desk. Holmes examined it closely, his fingers skimming the rim. "Still faintly warm," he murmured. "Mr. Price left in. Great haste!" Lestrade crossed his arms, "which suggests he didn't plan to disappear. Something forced him to leave." Holmes nodded approvingly. "Quite so." He scanned the small room, his gaze falling upon the logbook in front of the signal levers. He flipped through the pages, pausing at the final entry. 9:18 p.m. Express train entered tunnel. 9:19 p.m. Strange sound. Unclear. Investigating. Holmes tapped the page lightly. "Ah, Watson. You see, Mr. Price recorded something just before his disappearance. A strange sound." I leaned closer. What could it have been? Holmes closed the book and pocketed a few stray sheets of paper. "An excellent question, my dear Watson. But before we answer it, let us consider a more pressing one." "And what's that?" Lestrade asked. Holmes turned to him with a gleam of mischief in his eyes. Why was there no entry confirming that the train ever left the tunnel? A heavy silence fell over us. The answer was as clear as it was disturbing, because, officially, it never had. A sinister revelation. A gust of wind rattled the window panes of the signal box as Holmes stood motionless, his fingers lightly tapping the desk beside the logbook. His gaze was distant, fixed on, some unseen thread of logic weaving itself together in his mind. Lestrade, less inclined toward prolonged contemplation, exhaled impatiently. "Holmes, we've got 2 missing men and a vanished train. If Walker and Price were involved, we need to track them down before they disappear for good." Holmes, ignoring Lestrade's usual inclination for the obvious, turned instead to the railway worker who had led us here. "Tell me, my good man, who was the last person to see Mr. Price before he vanished?" The worker rubbed his chin. "That'd be George Meadows, sir, the night porter. He brought Mr. Price his tea around 9 o'clock. Is he still on duty? Aye, sir, down by the station." Holmes nodded. "Then let us not keep him waiting." We found George Meadows in the station's break room, nursing a cup of weak tea. He was an elderly man with a weathered face and an unsteady hand that trembled as he lifted his drink. Holmes wasted no time. "Mr. Meadows, you were the last to see Thomas Price before his disappearance. Did he say anything unusual?" Meadows shifted uncomfortably. "Can't say, sir. He seemed a bit on edge, but then again, long shifts will do that to a man." Holmes studied him closely. "Did you hear anything strange last night? Anything at all?" Meadows hesitated. "Well, sir, there was a noise, right around the time the train was supposed to come through." Lestrade leaned forward. "What kind of noise?" "A deep, rumbling sound," Meadows murmured, "like something heavy moving, but not on the tracks. It was beneath us, like the ground itself was shifting." A chill ran down my spine. Holmes's expression did not change, but I saw the gleam in his eyes, the unmistakable flicker of discovery. Lestrade, frowning, waved a dismissive hand. Probably just an echo from the train entering the tunnel. Holmes smiled faintly. "An interesting theory, Lestrade. However, it does not account for the fact that, according to Mr. Meadows, the sound continued long after the train should have emerged." Lestrade's expression faltered. Holmes turned back to the porter. "Tell me, Mr. Meadows, do you know of any underground tunnels or structures beneath this railway?" Meadows paled. "No, sir, not officially at least." Holmes arched a brow. "Ah, not officially. Now that is a most compelling detail." Meadows swallowed hard, as though he regretted speaking. "There's talk among the old railway hands, stories of abandoned tunnels from the early days of the line. Some say they were bricked up, forgotten. Others, they say there's more beneath these tracks than we know." Holmes turned to me, his voice low but charged with certainty. "Watson, I believe we have found the key to our mystery." Lestrade frowned. "Meaning?" Holmes straightened his coat, his sharp gaze returning to the tunnel in the distance. "Meaning, my dear Lestrade, that the train never emerged, because it had another path to follow. And she'd had shears dick shears." The weight of his words settled heavily upon us. If Holmes was correct, the train had not vanished. It had been diverted. But by whom? And to what end? The hidden path. Holmes strode toward the tunnel with renewed purpose, his sharp eyes scanning the walls and ground as if searching for an invisible thread connecting the mystery. I followed, my mind reeling with the implications of his latest deduction. Lestrade, still sceptical, hurried after us. "You're suggesting, Holmes, that an entire train was diverted through an abandoned tunnel? Do you have any idea what that would entail? The logistics alone—" Holmes raised a hand, silencing him. "I suggest nothing, Lestrade. I merely observe what logic dictates. If a train enters a tunnel and does not emerge, then it must have found another path, or been made to disappear by artificial means." We stood once more at the mouth of the tunnel, our lanterns casting flickering light onto the damp stone walls. Holmes knelt, brushing away loose gravel and revealing the iron rails beneath. He studied them with keen intensity, running his fingers lightly over the metal. Then, with a quiet murmur of satisfaction, he pointed to a section of the left rail. "Watson, observe this." I crouched beside him and followed his indication. At first I saw nothing out of the ordinary, but as I looked closer, I noticed a faint groove running parallel to the rail, almost imperceptible, but undeniably present. "A switch track," Holmes declared, standing abruptly. Lestrade blinked. "A what?" "A concealed railway junction, Lestrade. This track was designed to move, allowing a train to divert onto another path. However, someone has been exceedingly careful in disguising it. The mechanism is hidden beneath the gravel, and I suspect the lever to activate it is equally well concealed." Lestrade rubbed his chin, staring at the ground. "So, you're saying the train was diverted?" Holmes nodded. "Precisely. And given the secrecy surrounding it, we must ask ourselves, who possesses the knowledge and means to operate such a system?" I felt a growing unease. "You believe this was planned?" Holmes smiled darkly. "A train does not stray from its course by accident, my dear Watson. Someone engineered this disappearance with precise intent." Lestrade exhaled sharply. "Then we're dealing with more than a runaway conductor. This is a conspiracy." Holmes tapped a finger against his lips. "Yes, and one far more intricate than mere theft. To divert an entire train requires careful coordination and, most importantly, silence. Someone ensured that no reports would leave this station, and now, with Walker and Price missing, I fear we may be dealing with something even more dangerous." A sudden rustling sound echoed from the tunnel, and we all turned sharply. The railway worker who had accompanied us stepped forward hesitantly. "Sirs, if what you say is true, and the train went somewhere else, does that mean Mr. Walker and Mr. Price found out and were silenced?" The thought sent a chill through me. Lestrade's jaw tightened. "Blast it, Holmes, if that's the case, we need to move quickly." Holmes adjusted his coat and glanced towards the distant hills beyond the tunnel. "Indeed, Lestrade, and I believe our next step is clear. If the train did not continue on its expected route—" He turned, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. "Then we must uncover where it truly went." The path below, the railway worker shifted uneasily. "If there's a hidden track, sir, where does it lead?" Holmes turned his keen gaze toward the hills beyond the railway. "That, my good man, is precisely what we shall uncover." Lestrade muttered under his breath. "A secret tunnel, a vanished train, and missing railway men. Holmes, I don't like where this is going." Holmes merely smiled. "Then I suggest, Lestrade, that we ensure we arrive there before our unknown adversaries have the chance to intervene." With Holmes leading the way, we moved cautiously along the side of the tunnel, inspecting the ground for any sign of an alternate passage. The night air was damp, the lanterns casting elongated shadows against the stone walls. It was Holmes who first noticed the inconsistency. He stopped abruptly, crouching beside a section of earth just beyond the tunnel's exit. With careful precision, he brushed away loose dirt to reveal something astonishing. Iron rails, buried beneath a thin layer of gravel. Lestrade let out a low whistle. "So, there is another track." Holmes nodded. "And one deliberately concealed. Observe how the dirt has been distributed to mask any indentation. This was no accident, Lestrade. This was designed to remain hidden. I peered closer. But if the train was diverted onto these tracks, where do they lead? Holmes stood brushing off his hands. That, my dear Watson, is the question we must answer without delay. He turned sharply to the Irish railway worker. Are there any known facilities nearby? Abandoned stations, storage depots, anything of significance? The man hesitated, his face pale in the flickering lantern light. Well, there's one place. Lestrade frowned. Where? The worker swallowed. About 3 miles from here, deep in the hills, there's an old railway yard. It was built years ago, back when they were still laying track in this region. It was abandoned after some trouble. Holmes arched a brow. Trouble? The man hesitated, lowering his voice. There were accidents, sir. Workers went missing. Some say tunnels collapsed where there shouldn't have been tunnels at all. Lestrade scoffed. Superstition. Holmes, however, seemed intrigued, or perhaps something more deliberate. He turned on his heel. Gentlemen, I believe our train did not disappear at all. It was redirected to this forgotten yard. And if we wish to find our missing men and the answers we seek, that is precisely where we must go. Lestrade tightened his coat. The dead of night? Holmes, if someone orchestrated this, they won't take kindly to us snooping about. Holmes smiled. Then we shall have to be particularly discreet. With that, we set off toward the hills, the night pressing in around us. And as we walked, I could not shake the feeling that we were marching straight into a trap. The railway yard loomed ahead like a forgotten ruin, shrouded in mist and silence. Rusted tracks crisscrossed the overgrown ground, leading toward skeletal remains of storage sheds and derelict carriages, their broken windows staring like hollow eyes into the night. We moved cautiously, our lanterns dimmed. Holmes led the way with deliberate steps, his keen gaze sweeping across the abandoned yard. Lestrade exhaled sharply. Charming place. Are we sure this is where the train was brought? Holmes crouched beside a set of tracks, brushing away debris. Beneath the dirt, the rails gleamed unnaturally clean. Quite certain, Lestrade. The weight of a locomotive leaves distinct traces. These rails have been used recently. A chill ran through me, which means whoever orchestrated this is still close. Holmes nodded. Indeed, and I would venture to say they are expecting us. Lestrade stiffened. You mean we're walking into a trap? Holmes gave a small smile. A trap, perhaps, but not their trap, ours. Before we could question him further, a low sound echoed through the yard, a distant metallic clang, like a door shutting. Holmes raised a hand. Someone is here! We followed him deeper into the yard, moving between rusting carriages. The air was thick with the scent of oil and damp wood. Then, just ahead, we saw it. A train. The missing locomotive, standing silent on a concealed track behind an old storage building. Its paint was streaked with grime, but there was no mistaking it. Lestrade gaped. By heaven, it's here! But before we could advance, Holmes suddenly seized my shoulder and pulled me back, his voice a sharp whisper. Watson, down! We dropped behind an old coal cart, just as a group of men emerged from the shadows. There were 4 of them, their faces obscured beneath caps, their hands gripping iron rods and revolvers. They moved with purpose, scanning the yard. Lestrade muttered armed. Holmes remained perfectly still. As I suspected, a great deal of effort has gone into this operation. It is not merely a theft, it is a conspiracy. I felt my pulse quicken. Then what do we do? Holmes's eyes gleamed in the darkness. Why, Watson, we let them make the first move. Holmes's gambit. The men prowled between the rusted train cars, their eyes scanning the darkness. We remained motionless behind the coal cart, scarcely daring to breathe. Holmes, however, observed them with an expression of quiet amusement, as if watching a predictable performance unfold. One of the men, tall, with a thick coat and a heavy revolver at his side, paused near the missing locomotive. He turned to his companions and spoke in a low, urgent voice. "We need to move it. The authorities will be here soon." A second man, stockier and with a face half hidden beneath a scarf, shook his head. "Too risky now. We wait until the morning." Holmes leaned closer to Lestrade and whispered, "They do not yet realize we are here. I suggest we use that to our advantage." Lestrade frowned. "How do you propose we take on 4 armed men?" Holmes smiled. "By ensuring they believe we are the ones at a disadvantage." Before Lestrade could protest, Holmes did something utterly reckless. He stood up. "Good evening, gentlemen," he called, stepping into the dim lantern. Light. The 4 men spun around, their hands tightening on their weapons. Lestrade cursed under his breath, but had no choice but to follow suit, drawing his revolver. I did the same, my heart pounding. The leader narrowed his eyes. "Who the devil are you?" Holmes dusted off his coat and smiled. "Merely a curious observer, though I suspect you already know my name, Sherlock Holmes." A flicker of recognition crossed the leader's face, and his grip on his revolver tightened. "Holmes," he muttered, "we were warned about you." Holmes tilted his head. "Ah, how flattering! And who, may I ask, had the foresight to anticipate my involvement?" The man hesitated, but before he could answer, there was a sudden commotion from the far end of the yard. A sharp whistle pierced the night air. Lestrade grinned. "That would be my men." The gang turned as uniformed officers emerged from the shadows, surrounding them in a well-coordinated maneuver. The gangsters tensed, but they were outnumbered and trapped. One by one, they dropped their weapons. Holmes sighed, shaking his head. "A shame. I was hoping for a little more resistance." Lestrade stepped forward, satisfaction evident in his voice. "I suppose you planned this all along?" Holmes smiled. "Naturally. I knew from the moment we discovered the hidden track that this train was never meant to be stolen. It was meant to be used. These men did not take it for profit, Lestrade. They took it for transport." Lestrade frowned. "Transport? For what?" Holmes gestured toward the locomotive. "Shall we have a look?" With Lestrade's men securing the gang, we climbed aboard the missing train. Holmes moved swiftly, his sharp eyes scanning every detail. Then, with a satisfied nod, he stepped toward the rear cargo hold. Inside, stacked neatly beneath a tarp, were crates, dozens of them. Holmes pried one open and withdrew a small, unassuming package. Carefully, he unwrapped the cloth covering it and held the item up to the lantern light. Lestrade inhaled sharply. "Is that—" Holmes nodded. dynamite, and quite a substantial amount. A heavy silence fell over us. Lestrade's face darkened. They weren't stealing the train. They were smuggling explosives. Holmes replaced the package with meticulous care. Indeed, and given the effort they took to conceal their operation, I would hazard a guess that these explosives were destined for rather delicate business. I felt a chill run down my spine. A bombing? Holmes met my gaze, his expression grave. A most ambitious one, I suspect. Lestrade's men secured the remaining crates, and the gang was taken into custody. As we stood beside the locomotive, Holmes turned toward the gang's leader. Holmes's voice was calm, but his words were edged with steel. You may wish to cooperate, because I assure you, whoever hired you will not appreciate your failure. The man glared at Holmes but said nothing. Lestrade smirked. Oh, don't worry, Holmes. He'll talk soon enough. Holmes dusted off his hands. Good, because I suspect this mystery is far from over. Unravelling the conspiracy. As the last of the gang was led away in shackles, Lestrade turned to Holmes with a mixture of admiration and exasperation. You do realize, Holmes, that you could have been shot back there. Holmes dusted off his coat with an air of indifference. Lestrade, if I feared death every time I confronted criminals, I would have retired long ago. I exhaled slowly, still shaken by the confrontation. Even so, Holmes, I must agree with Lestrade. Stepping into plain sight was beyond reckless. Holmes merely smiled. And yet, Watson, it worked, did it not? Our adversaries surrendered without bloodshed, and we now have both the train and its illicit cargo. Lestrade crossed his arms. Speaking of which, we still don't know who was behind all this. The men we arrested are mere foot soldiers. Someone orchestrated this entire operation, and I'd wager they won't take kindly to its failure. Holmes tapped his chin thoughtfully. Quite so, Lestrade. Criminal enterprises of this scale are rarely the work of common thieves. No, this was something far more deliberate, an effort requiring precision, secrecy, and influence. I frowned. But what could be the purpose? Smuggling dynamite by train is no small feat. Whoever planned this must have had something significant in mind. Holmes's expression darkened. Indeed, Watson, and that is the question we must now answer. Lestrade sighed. Well, the gang leader isn't talking yet, but we'll get it out of him. Holmes turned toward the locomotive, his fingers running lightly along its steel frame. Perhaps, but I prefer not to wait. There is another way to uncover the truth. I glanced at him. And that is? Holmes gestured toward the cargo hold. The explosives were being smuggled to somewhere. If we determine their intended destination, we shall find the architect of this conspiracy. Lestrade rubbed his temple. And how do you propose we do that? Holmes smiled. By examining the cargo manifests, of course. Lestrade blinked. The what? Holmes stepped lightly into the train's cabin, running his fingers along the conductor's desk. He pulled open a drawer and withdrew a battered ledger. The railway keeps meticulous records, Lestrade. Even criminals must abide by logistics. He flipped through the pages, his sharp eyes scanning the entries. Then he stopped, his expression shifting ever so slightly. Well, well, he murmured, This is most interesting." I stepped forward. "What have you found?" Holmes turned the ledger toward us. Amidst routine shipments of coal and steel, one entry stood out, a shipment listed under a false company name, set to be delivered to a warehouse near the London docks. Lestrade leaned in. "That's a known smuggler's district." Holmes snapped the ledger shut. "Precisely. And if we wish to confront the true mastermind behind this affair, I suggest we pay it a visit, without delay." The mastermind exposed. The streets of London's dockside district were shrouded in fog, the gas lamps casting flickering pools of light upon the cobbled roads. Holmes led the way with quiet determination, his sharp gaze scanning the alleyways as we approached the warehouse listed in the train's ledger. Lestrade grumbled under his breath. "I don't like this, Holmes. If the man behind all this is as clever as you say, he won't go down without a fight." Holmes smirked. "Then let us ensure he does not see the fight coming." We reached the warehouse, an aging structure with iron-reinforced doors. Lestrade's men moved into position, flanking the entrance as Holmes stepped forward. With a gloved hand, he pushed the door open. Inside, rows of crates were stacked high, the air thick with the scent of sawdust and oil. At the far end of the warehouse, a group of men stood around a long wooden table, examining maps and documents. At the head of the table sat a man of striking presence, tall, elegantly dressed in a dark frock coat, his silver hair neatly combed back. His eyes, cold and calculating, met Holmes with a flicker of recognition. "Well, well," the man said smoothly. "Sherlock Holmes." Lestrade tensed. "You know him?" Holmes stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "Indeed. May I introduce Lord Percival Harrington, a man of great wealth and, it seems, even greater ambition." I started. "A lord? But why would a nobleman orchestrate such a crime?" Holmes clasped his hands behind his back. "Let us consider the facts. The stolen train, the hidden railway, the smuggled explosives, all point to a singular motive. Destruction, not theft." Lestrade narrowed his eyes. "Go on." Holmes gestured toward the documents on the table. Harrington's intention was to destroy a crucial railway bridge outside London, thereby crippling transport and causing chaos. He turned to Harrington. "No doubt you intended to manipulate the ensuing disaster for financial or political gain." Harrington smiled unruffled. "An impressive deduction, Mr. Holmes. And tell me, what proof do you have?" Holmes picked up a document from the table, holding it up for Lestrade to see. "This, for one, a detailed schedule of the explosives, delivery and detonation points. Rather incriminating, wouldn't you say?" Harrington's expression hardened. But before he could respond, Lestrade's men surged forward, seizing him and his associates. Lestrade smirked. "Well, Lord Harrington, it seems your little scheme has come to an end." As Harrington was led away, he turned to Holmes. "Tell me, Mr. Holmes, what gave me away?" Holmes adjusted his coat. "Your meticulousness, Lord Harrington. You hid the train, concealed the tracks, erased all traces of your involvement, except for one flaw." He tapped the ledger. "The false company name in the railway records. It was an anagram of your own." Harrington's eyes flashed with momentary surprise before he was escorted from the warehouse. I exhaled, shaking my head. Another case. Solved, Holmes. Lestrade nodded. I'll admit it. Your methods are unorthodox, but damnably effective. Holmes smiled. A most enjoyable puzzle indeed. He turned to me. Come, Watson. I believe we have earned ourselves a well-deserved rest. As we stepped into the foggy London night, I could not help but marvel once again at the brilliance of Sherlock Holmes.